what you need to understand is that I have all these feelings and all this new knowledge accumulating inside my chest, and I've got absolutely no outlet for them. Hello everybody, I'm Roxy, this is recmebook&stuff, and today I bring you what I hope will become a yearly tradition, which is all the music books I've read in 2020 ranked. So, in case you haven't been following me for that long, this is the year that I finally started studying music. Not professionally, of course, but you know, I have taken classes and I'm taking piano lessons. I went so crazy that instead of upgrading from a very cheap keyboard to a digital piano, I went full out and I got an acoustic, and it was wonderful. I love my baby so much, and I've been playing almost every single day since May. I'm not that good, quite honestly. It's very hard for me, but I love it and I enjoy doing it. It's one of the few things that has zero relationship to my professional life that is also a hobby. And I've always liked music. I also dance, and I've taken different dance lessons throughout my life, so music is always something that has been part of my life. And I have been reading music books sporadically for a long time, but this year it all went overdrive, and I am experiencing music and music theory and just sounds on a whole different level. So I have a list here. There are many lists here. So this is not the only time this will pop up. I have 15 books, I think, to tell you about. These are all non-fiction books, by the way. I do like to read fiction music books, but I don't think I crave them or I use them in the same way that I do with non-fiction books. So this is an exclusively non-fiction list. And the thing is that when it came to considering what counted as a music book, I didn't include anything that was too biographical without being musical. For example, at the beginning of the year, I read the graphic novel Bowie, which is very beautiful, but storytelling wise, it didn't really add anything to my understanding of Bowie's music. Similarly, Bowie's books, I also didn't count here because it's not really about his music. It's more about his whole performance-ish universe. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it was a judgment call and it was difficult to make, but I finally made it and I arrived at 15 books. So these are actually ranked. What went into the ranking, you might wonder? Well, personal liking, of course, but also I wanted to highlight those books that were particularly enlightening in the musical sense. Some biographies are here, I think. Biographies, as you know, can be extremely enlightening about the work, but maybe some books that I didn't think were so strong as non-fiction books, as I would evaluate other non-fiction books, did make it a little bit over some other books that I enjoyed reading more just as non-fiction books because I thought they were so useful. Okay, let's just get on with it. Number 15, the only one of these books that I didn't like at all. It was Avoid the Day by Jay Kirk, a non-fiction into the movements. This one was another one that I didn't know whether to include or not because the second half has nothing to do with music. Only the first half of the first half was really music related. However, that 1/4 of the book was actually quite good and really gave me an insight into Bela Bartok's music. He's a composer that I don't know that much about, so maybe that's why it made a huge impact on me, but I really like that section, which is the only reason I'm actually keeping that book. So basically this is Jay Kirk trying to avoid his father's deathbed because he has a tremendous relationship with him, and then he becomes an asshole and he treats everyone badly. But the worst part is that the second part he goes to film a movie in a ship near the Arctic, and that part is boring and doesn't make any sense. So yeah, that was 15. Number 14 is Great Pianists on Piano Playing. This is a collection of essays edited, I think, by James Cook. I put this so low because it was such a mixed bag. With anthologies, that is usually the case, but also just the format, I think, was unfortunate. To be fair, this is a very old book, so it didn't have the same considerations of nonfiction that we have today. Each of the essays was actually an interview that was conducted in many different languages, and it's all very stiff and proper and formal. Some of the essays, however, including Sergei Rachmaninoff's, were amazing, and I really learned from some of them. I highlighted a lot of these. I read this as an ebook, so it has a lot of my notes, and I really enjoyed some of them. Some others I didn't, and unfortunately the last one I hated, which is always sad to end on a low note. But there were some others that are great, and so if you are interested in piano playing, I do recommend this book, but don't go to great lengths to obtain it. Just like download it and read what works for you, basically. Number 13 was a bit of a disappointment, Stradivarius Genius by Toby Faber. I had fun reading this, but it hasn't stayed with me very much. I don't remember a lot of the things that he said. Basically, this promises to be a Stradivari. By the way, if you don't know who Stradivarius was, basically he was the most famous violin maker. Now Strats are the most sought after violins, and they are, well, not priceless, they are very much prized, but usually players that have Strats have been loaned or gifted their instruments. In any case, this was very messy. It's supposed to follow one of the 4 more prominent violins and the cello, but it does so in a very weird, unstructured way. I just think it was unsuccessful. It also doesn't really talk about Stradivarius that much, only like the first 2 chapters, and then goes on to talk about all the people who have played the instruments. It could have worked, but I just think the way it was put together was too messy. It needed a reconfiguration. That's what I'm saying. Number 12 is Musicophilia by Oliver Sacks. That was another one that I didn't know whether to include or not, but given its title and its subject, I do think it is quite relevant. This is something else entirely. It's a collection of essays by Oliver Sacks, who was one of the most famous, if not the most famous, neuroscientist of all time. Just a sweetheart with the general public. He wrote so many books that are accessible for so many people. I really like him, but this book felt a bit repetitive. I enjoyed it, but I don't know, maybe it's because I know about the brain that I wanted more on that. The anecdotal nature of these things that were supposed to be all disorders related to the brain and music just didn't work for me. I feel like I expected more and I didn't get it. Maybe also because I read it all in one go, I should have spaced things out more. I don't know, but there was something that didn't quite click in this one for me. Still interesting, and if you like Oliver Sacks and you like music, not a bad one to pick up. I forgot to include one. I'm going to edit this, of course. What do I do now? This is technically Roxy from the future because I would have edited this in the correct order. But basically, I'm going to stop saying numbers now because I effed up and I need to include everything, and so I lost count. So let's just get on with it. The next book is Why Mahler by Norman Lebrecht, How a Man and 10 Symphonies Changed the World, I think. And this is my second Norman Lebrecht of the year, which, you know, for a new to me author was quite interesting. I liked it, but I thought it was weak in its structuring. It's supposed to be a biography of Mahler, who, you know, was a very famous composer and conductor, and also dive into his inspiration and the impact his symphonies have had. And I think the biography part was very weak. You can tell that Norman Lebrecht is more of a music critic and not a biographer. But the musical analysis, and especially the analysis of the impact he has had, plus the appendix where he includes recordings of all the symphonies with commentary of why some of them are better than others, is so good. So I still recommend this book if you like Mahler, but don't expect the world from it, basically, which is fair. You know, it's not a terrible thing to say, but it is what it is. Something of His Art by Horatio Clare. This is a lovely essay on Bach and Bach music. Horatio Clare is a prominent travel writer and a fan of Bach since he listened to the cello suites at a very low point in his life and felt completely moved by them. And so for this BBC radio or documentary series, he goes with a small crew to follow Bach's footsteps of a journey he took from one city to another that was fundamental in his career. He reflects upon what he was thinking and creating, and I love this book. I think actually from here on, all the books that I'm mentioning are books that I love. It's not a perfect book, but it's short and sweet, and if you like travel writing and Bach and music writing, it's a really good one to check out. The next one is my second Lebrecht of the year, the Maestro Myth, which in my opinion was much more successful. This talks about the emergence of the conductor as a key figure in the orchestra and how and why they became the best paid member of orchestras. It's fascinating, and I think it's much more focused, and although it does get confusing at times, again, it has some of the problems that I mentioned in why Mahler is much more successful, and it's just so fun to read because it is a bit gossipy. A lot of these conductors have led very scandalous lives, but it's not gratuitous. Like, he does talk about the disadvantages of jet set conductors and what it means to not have conductors that are fully involved. And also it talks about the business of music conducting nowadays. I mean, it is a bit old. I think it came out in the 2000s, and my edition has like a second forward, but it's still very interesting. I think even if it's a bit outdated, the main points are still very valid nowadays. Now, after 2020, who knows? It also talks about female conductors and conductors who are male but not white, who have been historically relegated from the podium, and why that might be changing and how, but so slowly. It has a lot of social critique. It's very interesting. I really enjoy it and suggest it. Oh, my one observation would be that it is not 100% objective book, even less so than any book cannot be objective, but normal Lebrecht has opinions and he is not afraid to state them as fact, but it's not that it's misleading, it's just that you can tell it's his opinions. You do need to take some of those comments with a pinch of salt, but overall, again, very solid book. The next one is Claudiarao by Marisol García. I'm sorry you've heard me talk about this book so much, but you can see it's quite high on the list, so I've really enjoyed it. Sadly, it's not translated into English. It won't get translated into English because, as I mentioned in my December wrap-up, it is part of a series of biographies by a small indie Chilean press, so they are not really looking outwards. But if you read in Spanish, it is very interesting. If you don't, then go check out whatever you can about Claudiarao because he's a fabulous Chilean pianist that I really respect. On top of that, the book itself is wonderful. It's such a short but comprehensive biography. It includes pictures. It talks about his approach to music, his political ideas, and his biography. So I think it's just such a nice, tightly wrapped work that I cannot stop recommending and singing its praises. Next, we have one that I absolutely adored and I really want to read, The Secret Lives of the Composers, which is a book of collective biographies, and you know that's my jam. All about different composers, and it's great because it starts with a very jokey but really useful file on each composer, and it states their zodiac sign, but also where you might have heard their music. In 3 pages, it also gives you a really cool, quick overview of what their music style was and their relevant bio, so if you want to find out more, you can go and do so. But as an introduction, this is really good. I also appreciated that it includes a short chapter on female composers and why they have been so neglected, and it made me so angry, but you know, it's necessary that it's there. And it also finishes with a chapter on video game music and how it's become more and more complex and more orchestral. That is also fascinating. So it's just a great synthesis of what classical music has been and where it has been moving in the last few years. So I really recommend that one. The next book is The Art of Practicing by Madeline Bruiser, and this is the one that I was referencing when I said that maybe I don't like that way it's written very much. It's very self-helpy in tone and I just don't like that, but it was so useful in my own practice. When I got my first real piece to learn, I was so nervous. It took me a long time to figure it out. My hands were forever changed after that, and I was so nervous every time I went to practice. I don't know why. It was also lockdown, you know, everything was heightened. But this book helped me so much because it taught me things. It taught me how to practice effectively. It taught me posture things that I didn't know because I had to have online lessons. So And what is so good about it is that it's very practical, and Madeline Bruiser was a performer herself. If you are a professional or a casual or something like that, it will help you too, because it's aimed at different levels and it has different advices, and it even has different sections for different types of instruments. So overall, really, really worth your time. Next one is Mademoiselle, Conversations with Nadia Boulanger. Another one that I've read recently, so you've heard me talk about it. It was also part of my Curious Adventure challenge, link down below, and it was in my December wrap-up, link down below. And I think I even mentioned it in my nonfiction November TBR. Link down below. So yeah, I just love this book so much. It's literally conversations by the author. Bruno, last name unpronounceable by me. Sorry, it's my fault, Bruno. They talk about music and composition and learning and teaching. Nadia Boulanger was, of course, a very famous conductor and also a very famous performer and music educator. She loved music so much, but was not precious about it. She was so pragmatic, but also just tough, and she taught until she couldn't anymore. She virtually died educating, and I just have so much respect for her, and she's just such an amazing person and musician, and just I love this book so much. And I'm very sad because, as I've said in all my videos where I've talked about this, it is not translated into English. If you can get your hands on this, please read it because it's so good. The following one is Who Knew? Questions you didn't know you had about classical music. I think that's the subtitle. I'm quoting from memory. By Robert Cutietta. I don't remember when I read this, but I really, really enjoyed it. I placed this very highly because I think the writing is as good as the purpose and what it achieves. Basically, Robert Cutietta is, I don't want to say the director, but I might be lying, of the Horton music school in California. He had this radio program where people sent questions to be answered by him, and the questions are really cool because they are for people who are already interested in classical music but are not in the classical music business or environment. They are not connoisseurs, you know, and they may not have anyone else to ask, which I think is really cool because classical music can be so intimidating if you don't feel like you can just waltz in there, no pun intended, and listen to a symphony and enjoy it, even if you know nothing about it, which you can totally do. But I understand if it makes you feel uncomfortable that you don't know, because if you go to these places, there are these people that do know. I do understand that that sense of entitlement over your own culture takes a while to develop, so it's fine. If you have questions, Robert Cutietta has your back. He answers in very concise manner with a lot of humor, and I just loved it. I also learned so much. A lot of the things I already knew, and when I already knew them, I felt so proud. But also there were a lot of things that I didn't know. And I think if you are in that cusp of, you know, getting into classical music and have a lot of questions, it's great. Yeah, I really love it. Moving on, we have What to Listen For in Music by Aaron Copland. Aaron Copland, of course, is the famous conductor and American composer. I am not an especially big Copland fan. I read this because it's considered to be one of the greatest music theory books, and I would tend to agree. It is very simple. So if you've seen any other music theory book, it is scary. I've studied neuroscience, used, you know, medical text, and I still haven't felt that intimidated. Not even when I had to go back to high school and remember how to solve equations have I felt as intimidated as the times I've seen these very thick music theory books with all those diagrams. Oh my god. I mean, they are helpful, I'm sure they are, but they are also very scary. So if you're one of those people who, like me, are just starting at an adult age, kind of by your own, even if you're taking lessons, it depends with whom, but like you're not going to get a really strong theoretical education, this is really good to cover all those bases. It's divided into the 4 elements of music, or what Copland proposes are the main elements, like harmony, rhythm, that kind of stuff. And then it goes into different forms. So for example, sonata allegro form, the rondo, the chaconne, that sort of thing. And finally, it goes into genre. It's just so good. And to think it was written, I think originally like in 1930 and then updated in the 1950s, and it continues to be so valuable. It was very approachable in tone. I don't think it was dense at all. You need to reread it, and I certainly do need to reread it. It's still so helpful and so well structured and so precise and clear. Kind of cute now that you read it. It talks about how sometimes you can't listen to music very easily, or that nowadays it's so much easier to listen to music because people might have radios at home, and it's like, oh honey, it's about to get so good. It also has recommendations that were updated by one of his students, so they are much more modern, and not all of them, but most of them are on Spotify, so you can check those out. Overall, amazing textbook. Really, really recommend it. And I say textbook, but it doesn't feel like a textbook. And actually, the senior edition is like this. It's a small mass market paperback that I marked all over. So yeah, please check it out. So good. Okay, now entering the top 3. These books are all so good. I want to bathe in them, and I want to reread them over and over. So number 3, Listen to This by Alex Ross. This is a collection of music criticism compiled through the ages, so it's not a collection but closer to an anthology. So good. So Alex Ross wrote The Rest is Noise, which is one of the most important music books of the 20th century, and it was supposed to get here like 2 months ago, and it still hasn't arrived. So I'm very happy about that. Enough with the joke that is a Chilean postal service. Let's move on to Listen to This, which luckily did arrive. So the essays range from the first title essay, which is Ross talking about how he grew up listening to classical music and was so snobbish about it. But then he started working in his university radio station where he programmed classical music, and right away there was a punk show, and so he learned about punk and experimental music, and his life was forever changed. He also has essays on music in China and John Luther Adams, who is now one of my favorite composers. He liked music writing and music criticism and cultural criticism, but that relates to music. It also has essays on Radiohead and Bjork. So just, you cannot miss this. You need to read it. And you also need to read Let's Talk About Love by Carl Wilson. This is part of the 33 and the Third series, which are books on booklets, actually, they're very short, on different albums, and this one is on the album Let's Talk About Love by Celine Dion. I never thought I would love this, but it is hailed as the single best book in that collection. It has some competition, but overall the consensus is that this one is the best. So Wilson has always hated Dion, and it's personal for him because he is from Quebec, just like her, and so he's seen her everywhere, and he can't really understand how she can be so famous, and she just hates what she stands for. But then he thinks about how he used to be such a rock snob, and he used to listen to only very experimental stuff, and then as he grew up, he started opening up to new genres, some of which became his favorite genres with time, and so he starts thinking, okay, maybe if I gave Celine Dion a shot the same way I give a shot to other albums, if I were listening to this for the first time, how would I go about reviewing it? And so he does just that. He starts with a biography and a background on her music, and he goes into the creation of the album, he goes into the reception of the album, he talks to fans, and he even goes to see Celine Dion live. And beyond just Celine Dion, he takes her and what she represents as a starting point to answer the much debated question of taste. Actually, the subtitle of this is A Journey to the End of Taste. And so it draws on philosophy and sociology and cultural criticism to give us this amazingly engaging and fun and funny and still earnest, not cynical at all, exploration of what taste is and what taste means nowadays, that everything has become much more democratic in a way, but at the same time we are much more determined by our public and collective and individual identities. It's such a great book. Everyone needs to read it. Please read it. It's so good. And then finally, on number 1, my absolute favorite music book, one that I just love so much and I think about so often, it's Debussy's Paris by Catherine Kautsky. This is Unlike the others, a book that I don't necessarily think everyone needs to read because it is much denser, but it was so perfect for me and I just loved it. So what I describe this as being is a literary criticism book, but on Debussy's music, because it uses these techniques of analyzing what the cultural sounds too, but more than that, literary influences. So for example, what poets was he hanging out with, what artists, what ideas of, for example, cubism and fragmentation were surrounding him, what ideas of nationalism and orientalism were going on in his context, but translates that to the text, meaning the scores, and she talks about the different scales he uses and what arpeggios mean here or what this progression means there. It was something unlike I had ever experienced. I understand that for people who are much more experienced and understand music much more, this might be common occurrence, but for me it was completely eye-opening. I didn't know you could do that, or maybe I did, but I had never seen it done and understood it. So I really, really love it. I think it's such an amazing book, and you can feel Kautsky's love for Debussy's music, but she's not without criticism, and she's also just such a good writer of cultural context. You know, I love my cultural criticism through media, but I'd never seen it with music, and the fact, of course, that it's done with one of my favorite composers doesn't hurt. I just adore this book so much, and I really, really want to acquire a physical copy of it. So yeah, that was it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you enjoyed it, please give a thumbs up, please subscribe, and comment, well, have you read any of these books, or do you want to? And do you have a specific piece that you want to recommend? I've been listening to Elgar's Cello Concerto a lot for many reasons. I love that piece, but it's also helped me process some stuff that have been going on in the background. So also please check out the Bibliophile Daily, my short form podcast of literary facts that airs every single day. I'm going to link down below to the announcement video where you can find all the links to all the platforms where that is playing. If you want to check out all of my other social media, is listed down below. And that's it. See you next time. Can I film like this? My back hurts. Can I just... Serious question. How much would it bother you? Please let me know, because maybe I'm just sitting up for nothing and I could be lying down on this couch all the time. So let me know, guys.